Hey y'all, it's Nikki. I have to tell you about Tecovas boots. I finally have a pair and they're handmade, high quality, stylish, and comfortable. I even got them customized with leather stamping. The folks at Tecovas will help you find just the right pair. So swing by for yours at the Tecovas flagship on South Congress or their store at the Domain. Plus, good news, they just opened a new store in Georgetown at 709 Main Street for those of y'all that live a little further north. So come shop with me at Tecovas. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Today on CityCast Austin, y'all, did you see that debate this week with Ted Cruz and Cruz-Allred? Their race over Texas Senate seat is close, but these two men could not be more different. I'm here with one of Austin's top political reporters to break this all down. CityCast Austin is brought to you by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tecovas. It's Thursday, October 17th. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, I am here with Ryan Chandler, politics reporter for KXAN. So, debate.
Yeah.
Senator Cruz has held his seat for more than 10 years. Congressman Cruz-Allred is challenging him for it. The two debated this week. Who you think won? Who won the debate? That's the first question I gotta ask.
I know, and it's always the most difficult question. That is not for me to say. Is it fair to cop out and say that they both won?
I mean, sure. Listen,
I don't want to alienate any of our listeners here, but what I will say is that this was the best debate that I've seen all election season. I thought it was better than any of the national debates that we saw at the presidential level. I thought it was moderated very well. WFAA did a great job.
Right.
I have a lot of friends up there and very proud of them. I thought it was a substantive debate and very entertaining. It got testy. And I think that the energy we saw really matches the stakes of this election.
Okay, so I'm glad that you're here because the entire time I was like, I am ready to go to bed. I do not like it. I'm bored. I'm upset.
Entertaining is maybe a subjective qualification. For a nerdy politics reporter like me, I couldn't. I wanted to go for another hour.
Yeah, I think that my coworkers are the same. But I was just like 10 minutes in, I was like, shut up. But okay, so for me, debates are typically the same shit all the time.
Right.
In my opinion, it's like a question is asked and then they tap dance and soft shoe around the question and don't answer it, but then they'll say 17 other different things. And so there are a lot of moments in this debate where I was, if I'm being honest, sort of listening, and then something would be said, and I'd be like, what?
Right.
Like, what top 2 or 3 moments made you either just, like, got your attention or hyped you up, like, or clutch your pearls?
Well, you're right. I think they teach politicians on the first day of class that you should never actually answer the moderator's questions. Hey, the questions are always just an open platform to talk about whatever you want, right?
Oh, my God.
And we see that from both parties, every candidate, every debate.
Yep.
But that was especially true. I think one of the standout moments for me was the very first question out the gate. Jason Whiteley asked Ted Cruz about abortion, which I'm sure his campaign was not happy that was the very first topic because Cruz tries to tap dance around that issue at every point. He knows that it's a weak spot for him, and he knows that his position is not popular in Texas. So what the moderator asked is not what he thinks about abortion policy generally, but what he thinks about it as a person.
Right.
Because whenever Ted Cruz is asked about abortion, he frames it in a way that makes it seem like his opinion does not matter at all. He says, this is a state issue. I'm not in the state legislature. It's none of my business. But what I think is important for voters to know, and what Whiteley, the moderator, asked is, what do you think about this? If you are voting in Texas to decide abortion policy at the state level, like we all do now, how would you vote?
Right.
Cruz did not answer. He said, look, I'm not in the state legislature. That's not a federal issue. the moderator followed up 2 other times.
Yeah, he asked him 3 total times.
And said, why will you not answer this question? In maybe more polite phrasing. And Cruz said, why do you keep asking me this?
Yeah. Oh my God. I was like, oh, so he just basically was like, my boy, I'm not going to answer. Why do you keep asking me this question? And you know what I thought was so funny? Because to your point, if he wants to take a hard stance, he does. When he was like, as for me and my family, we stand with Israel. Period, point blank. I think Israel is having a just and fair war. I was like, oh, so you can make a declarative statement about how you feel. You can make a declarative statement about your opinion and how you vote, but not on abortion. Right. We got to ask you like 3 times. That was one of my pearl clutching moments. I was like, oh, Ted Cruz can make a declarative statement about something.
Well, it speaks to the very difficult position that Cruz is in now, because if you look at polling of Texas voters, the law on the books, one of the strictest abortion bans in the country, is not popular with Texas voters. The majority of Republicans are, as they say, pro-life. However, over 80% of Texans support exceptions for rape and incest, including a vast majority of Republicans even. And the state law goes farther and doesn't allow for those. So I think Cruz is in a box here where he doesn't want to alienate his base who may support the Texas law, but he also wants to reach out to other voters who are very concerned about this law. So he will not ever talk about abortion unless you really push him on it.
Those 2 times caught my attention. And then also, I was really tickled by the fact that just like out the gate, Allred was like, Cancun. You went to Cancun. It was like 35 seconds in. He was like, this man went to Cancun and left y'all freezing. That's all I got to say. Mic drop. I was like, oh, you coming out the gate. Swinging.
Here's what I'll say about Allred. He was clearly very prepared and more energetic.
Yeah.
I've interviewed Allred, 4 or 5 times now. And I remember watching the debate last night and I was like, who is this guy?
Yes.
He and Cruz have very different demeanors. Cruz is a master of this craft. He's a great debater, very energetic, very forceful. Allred has a different style. He is reserved, contemplative. But last night, I don't know how much coffee he had before the debate, but he was forceful and matching Cruz's energy much more than I thought he would.
Yeah, he came to play for sure. I don't think that Ted Cruz is used to the condescension. Right. And so it was nice to see someone kind of put him in that headspace. So speaking of Cruz, so he was raised in Houston and he's been an active in the Republican Party for a while. But what would you say that he is best known for?
He it was very deliberate early in his career to build a national profile. He won Iowa in 2016. People forget that.
Oh, yeah.
In the presidential race. He was a rising star, and he came in second to Trump in 2016. So he was really a beloved national figure among some of the most conservative Republicans nationwide, which is good if you want to run for president in a Republican primary. But now I think he is seeing some of the downsides of being a national name. That comes with a lot of its baggage. He has a long record and maybe some views that he may not want to highlight anymore, like on abortion, for example.
Right.
In a Republican national primary, he was unapologetically pro-life, saying he wants to end abortion. But now he's going through a rebrand. For this race. He wants to moderate some of his views and focus on some of his bipartisan credentials, which he does have some. He has recently worked on some less partisan economic priorities for Texas, like highway development, for example, doing that with Democrats in the Senate. And that's what he wants to talk about now. So
on the other end of the fence, let's talk about Colin Allred. In a nutshell, what is he about? What is he known for, you think?
So Colin Allred is a congressman from Dallas. He played football for Baylor and then went on to the NFL for a few seasons with the Tennessee Titans. Left the NFL, became a civil rights lawyer, and then ran for Congress in 2018. He is also, I think, dealing with the same problems that Cruz is, where some of his past statements running in a Democratic primary don't line up with the candidate he wants to be now. Cruz has really hammered him on his past statements, calling, for example, the border wall. He called it racist multiple times when he was running in 2018. Is a different race. You're trying to appeal to more progressive voters. So you may lean into more progressive statements like that. Cruz has really hammered him on transgender policy.
Oh, that was a nightmare. Yeah.
That was one of the most contentious parts of the night.
It really was.
Allred is also trying to moderate himself and cast him as a bipartisan as well. It's interesting how both of these people are trying to run from the farthest of their parties and try to be the moderate centrist in both of their respects. How well that's working, who's to say? Because they both have pretty partisan pasts, but that's just the race that this is.
I want to actually pause here and talk about the conversation about transgender rights, because in the protection, in quotation, of the integrity of sports.
Yeah.
Because this week, Allred kind of came under fire because he was backtracking some of the things that he had supported before. It looked like he was throwing the LGBTQ community under the bus, specifically trans Texans under the bus. And they both danced around like, do you or do you not think that our transgender Texans deserve the same types of rights? Instead of what they did is they both had this really inflammatory language. Cruz kept saying, we don't want men in our bathrooms, in our locker rooms with little girls. We don't want men and boys. He's a master at like tricking your brain and using fear-based conversation. Like he knows who he's talking to when he uses those kind of terms. Yeah. But then it went a step further, and he started talking about sex changes and children being sterilized. And what I would have liked for Allred to do is to counter that and just be like, hey, that's not what this is. But instead, he still took a middle of the road, just like, you know, parents of transgendered youth are worried about their safety. Your ads are dangerous. And so I'm curious about, like, how do you think this is going to affect either of them? Or is it going to affect either of them, do you think?
It's such a good question, and it's such a hairy issue to discuss for both of these candidates. I think it speaks to the underlying dynamics of the race and Cruz's strategy, where he knows that he needs to turn out as many base Republicans as possible. So he focuses on the most divisive, the most emotional issues. This is one of them. Yeah. On Allred's side, he's focusing on issues near and dear to the most progressive Democrats, like abortion, like January 6th, threats to democracy. On the transgender issue, the amount of time that it took up in the debate was striking to me. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what Cruz wanted. The time that it took up in the debate is far disproportionate to how important the majority of voters tell us this issue is to them. It's not on most voters' minds one way or the other, frankly. And two, as important as this issue is to the transgender community, it's such a small section of who will be voting in November. I was surprised how much time this issue took up, but I think Cruz likes that because he wants this race to be about that issue instead of, say, abortion, right?
Right.
And Allred said as much. He said, this issue is a distraction that Cruz wants to talk about. Let's talk about, the policies affecting every Texan, like abortion or the economy, things like that.
Regardless of how big they are in the grand scheme of things, you still have this entire community whose rights are being threatened, just like women's rights are being threatened.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he got him to say, I don't support boys playing girls' sports. That is huge, huge, huge that he backed him to a corner. He was able to back him into a corner and get him to say the thing. And whether that was a distraction or not, I think that it worked.
I think you're right. I think Cruz is winning on that issue. In just like you said, he is forcing Allred to adopt a position that maybe is different in the past.
Yep.
He's been an ally, a good ally to the LGBTQ community. I believe that he wants to support transgender rights just as much as anyone. But it's just difficult when you're running in Texas. You have to moderate yourself a little bit. And if Allred is going after Republican voters, he may be worried that issue in particular may isolate him.
So how close do you think this race is? How close is the race?
It's very close. Most polls put Cruz at a 3 to 5 point lead. Many polls are within the margin of error. There was one outlier poll that even had Allred up by a point. So this is as close as a race can be. Remember, in 2018, Cruz only won by less than 3%. I think that scared him, and it taught him that he needs to be a different candidate, run a different campaign, and it's attracting a lot of Democratic money. More money has been spent in this race than in any Senate campaign in history. I believe now it's more than $130 million already.
Wow.
Back in 2018, when Beto became a national breakout star, throughout the entire election, both campaigns spent $113 million. We've already gone over that. So that speaks to the stakes of this election, not just for Texas, but for the entire country. The Democrats have such a slim majority in the Senate, and they're probably going to lose a seat in Montana, that this could make the difference in Texas, and Democrats are recognizing that.
And do you think that this debate will have any impact? Do you think that Texans are even watching?
Yes and no.
Okay.
If you look at the most recent polling from the University of Houston Hobby School put out a poll last week that said only 3% of voters are undecided in this race. Persuasion is not the goal.
Okay.
It's more motivating turnout, driving out your partisans to get to the polls and be angry and energetic, right? Can you picture the voter out there who's looking at Ted Cruz and Colin Allred and being like, I just like both of them so much I can't decide? No, that voter does not exist. And that bears out in the polling. So to the extent that it could persuade somebody, I don't think that is the purpose. But if you remember, in 2018, Cruz won by less than 3 points. So maybe that 3% that may be persuadable could make all the difference.
That's true. So, Allred attacked Cruz on some pretty obvious events. And, I'm curious, how harmful do you think these are to Cruz's reputation at this point, honestly? Because I feel like the people that are going to vote for him, they already know.
Cruz has been not able to live down the Cancun thing. 3 years later, that still dogs him. And I think he's sensitive to that. It's difficult to say because I think Democrats have a tendency to say, Ted Cruz is so beatable, nobody likes him. But it's not true. In Texas, I have been to Cruz rallies where people are passionate. They love this guy. And if you're a strong conservative, he's your ally. He's a good representative for you in DC. So I would caution Democrats to underestimate Cruz and be like, this, nobody likes him. Why can't we beat him? Because there are a lot of people in Texas who really do. And it's easy to forget the parts of Texas when you're living in Austin or Dallas or Houston that are so red. Republicans have it's a red firewall of about 1 million votes in West Texas.
Yep.
That is very difficult for a Democrat to overcome. So what Allred's been trying to do is really spend millions of dollars to drive turnout in the big blue cities to try and overcome that. But Cruz has got a lot of votes in the bank out in West Texas.
Oh my gosh. I like that you call it the red wall. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Now I have that visual. It's there. So on the opposite side, Cruz attacked Allred for his sort of like middle of the road, changing perspectives on things. Just like he backtracked on the pro-trans and pro-women's right to choose, but he also talked about his immigration stance and how he's backtracked on that. He's talked about, Israel and Hamas and how Allred backtracked on that. He really went after this kind of like middle of the road flippy floppiness that it seems like Allred has. How do you think that's affecting Allred's reputation?
You're right. Allred came from, a pretty unapologetically progressive background. When he was running in 2018, that was a different environment that was more friendly to progressives. And he has had to change his persona a little bit in order to run a statewide race. But that's not unique to Allred or to Cruz. I mean, you always see candidates, once they're out of the primary and they need to appeal to a broader coalition, they temper themselves a little bit. I don't think that is surprising at all.
So essentially what you're saying is because this is something that people do in politics, it's not going to hurt him because that he's essentially changing and growing and, the political climate is different. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. And keep in mind, no matter what Allred said or did, Cruz would be running as he is right now, that say he is a radical liberal, too liberal for Texas. He did the same thing to Beto O'Rourke in 2018. And I even think Beto was a little bit more liberal of a candidate than Allred is now. It's different strategies.
I mean, listen, when he ended by saying that, if Texas goes blue, then he's essentially was like, if Texas goes blue, it is a direct threat to our way of life and democracy or something like that. I was like, all right, sir, settle down.
And he's right about one thing that he'll agree with, AOC and Bernie Sanders on, which is if Texas does go blue, that is a sea change like we haven't seen in American politics in a very long time. Texas hasn't elected a statewide Democrat since the 90s. It's been 30 years. So if Texas can do that, which it will eventually, just demographically, the way new voters are coming in, it's going to happen. And that terrifies Republicans. I just interviewed Bernie Sanders last week when he was making a swing through college campuses in San Marcos at Texas State and UT. He did that with some of the biggest progressives in the country, AOC, Greg Casar. The fact that Bernie Sanders is campaigning in Texas should tell you something. He sees real opportunity here, and he agrees with Cruz in the sense that Texas is gettable, and nobody around the country should underestimate Democratic potential here.
So I want to backtrack because you did bring up Beto O'Rourke. He traveled to every single county in 2018, and he still lost to Cruz by only about 219,000 votes. What is different about this race? What's different about this one?
Well, for one, 2.5 million new Texans are on the voter rolls than in 2018.
Wow.
So you look at that margin, 200,000 votes. How many of that 2.5 million are Democrats? That's really the big question. That is more than enough to make up the margins that Beto left in 2018. The demographic shifts have been fascinating, and Cruz is trying to adjust to that. He knows that just the environment is less favorable to him. Now, the environment in 2018 was also a lot more favorable to Democrats. You had an unpopular Republican president in the White House. Now you have an unpopular Democratic president. That was a midterm election, which is always in the favor of the party out of power. In 2018, it was the Democrats. This is a general election with more turnout, just different forces at play. So I want to be hesitant to compare the races too much, but there are a lot more people voting in Texas. And the big question is how many of them are going to vote Democratic?
Yeah. Which way they swinging? I really want to talk about this idea. Like, are we turning more purple? Like, are we still just like always going to be red? I think that a lot of times people assume that we're always going to be red, and I think that affects voter turnout personally. But some people think that we're closer to purple than we think.
I would say we already are purple.
Oh.
I mean, even if you look at the presidential polling, it's always like 48% Trump, 45 or low 40s for Harris.
Yeah.
And people around the country like to see Texas as this dominant ruby red state, but almost half of Texans are voting for Kamala Harris. So it's really
purple.
It is already purple. I'll tell you that, and that does not quite bear out in most elections, especially for Congress and the state house, because those districts are so gerrymandered to be so partisan.
Right.
The state house is still overwhelmingly conservative, but still it's like 40-some% Democrats in state office. So the narrative that Texas is like this red, always will be red firewall, I don't think is true. Whether this is the year the Democrats can pull it off, I don't know.
Okay. I like that. Do you think we'll ever be blue? Ever? So maybe not this year, but maybe one day.
It's I don't want to say it's inevitable, but just looking at the demographic changes, it's going to happen. And Republicans, rather, are doing their best to delay that.
Yeah.
But no, Texas is a real battleground and becoming more so every election.
I love that you're giving me a little bit of hope, Ryan. I am appreciative of that. So this year is a big election year. A lot of voters, though, will be at the polls because they want to vote for president, because it's such a contentious race. Do you think that presidential voters will affect the Cruz-Allred race?
100%.
Okay.
No, absolutely. General elections always have much higher turnout than midterm elections. I think just because of that, if all other factors being the same, if Beto O'Rourke ran the race he did with everything being the same in a general election, he would have won, just because turnout would have been much higher.
Right.
This time, people are going to be motivated to go to the polls, you're right, because of Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. Those are the people who are in the news, and normal people who don't pay attention to politics all the time, like me, just don't know Ted Cruz or Cruz-Allred as well. A lot of people will check just the D or the R, but Allred's key to victory is to make sure that he gets crossover voters.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a voter who goes in and votes for Donald Trump and Cruz-Allred? It's hard to do, but Allred needs to hope that there are some,
that they exist.
And that he needs to outperform Harris. Harris is not going to win Texas. We know that. So if Allred's going to, he needs more voters than Harris does. And that means courting some Republicans or some independents, or hoping that Republicans vote for Trump and don't vote for Cruz.
I'm curious, do you think that there was anything said at the debate last night at any point that you were like, ooh, that might hurt you? Any moment where you were like, you messed up out of either of them?
Off the top of my head, I think for Allred, the point you made earlier was great, which his hesitancy to really lean into transgender rights and kind of moderate his position there will, I don't know if it's going to convince any progressives not to vote for him, but it may make some less motivated, less excited about his candidacy. Now, that is a relatively small proportion of the electorate in Texas, and Allred may just be making the political calculation that he just has to sacrifice that position to get more moderate votes.
Right.
For Cruz, I think one thing that would most hurt him is, again, abortion. That is Allred's strongest position.
Yeah.
And it is one that voters consistently tell us is one of the most important issues. That being said, it's usually like the third most important issue behind immigration and the economy.
I'm glad that you have this context, because for me, during the debate, I was thinking, oh man, this conversation about Israel is going to be something that's going to come back for both of them to bite them in the butt later. I'm curious what your opinion is as to why what's happening in Israel isn't more of an issue in Texas, do you think? Or more of a hot button issue?
It's an incredibly important issue, and it will be for both of these men. If they get to the Senate, they're going to be one of the votes on whether we go to war or not, right?
Yeah.
But I think now, for a lot of Texans, they have the luxury of seeing this as a faraway conflict.
Okay.
That if you're struggling to pay for groceries or you want reproductive care, it's just not the most important issue for you, right? People are very selfish in their votes, and there's nothing wrong with that. People need to vote in their self-interest.
Yeah.
And right now, at least, this is not a war that is impacting the daily lives of most Texans.
Yeah, that's true. So there is right now a pretty big gender gap that Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have kind of inspired. You know what I mean? Like, women are showing up in droves, just like loudly and proudly for Kamala. Do you think either of these candidates will benefit from this gender gap that's kind of started happening at the presidential level?
Yeah, that's a really good point. She is a sizable lead among women, but Trump has about the same lead among men, especially young men. It's hard to say how that will impact the Senate race. I think Allred, because he's been campaigning so heavily on the reproductive issue, will perform much better than Cruz with women. But the same might be true with Cruz among men. So they may cancel each other out. It's going to depend on how frequently each group turns out. And you should expect that to be about equal.
Now I'm just going to be nosy because I like to be nosy. So during the debate last night, I had a drinking game that
I hope it wasn't take a shot every time you hear allredfacts.com, because you would have been on the floor.
We changed it up mid debate, changed it up. I was like, all right, every time he says allredfacts.com, we all taking a drink. So my question is, do you have a debate drinking game? Or do you drink? I don't even know. I'm assuming that you drink. But
I do. Typically not during debates. I was at work watching this in the conference room, studying up for the coverage we did last night. And of course, to prepare for this wonderful interview today. But absolutely. I love to, if there's like a presidential debate at home, I'll have a few drinks just to get through the stress and anxiety that all of this spurs, right?
It's so stressful. It can be. It's so stressful.
I don't play specific drinking games because I find that you're tapped out before the debate is halfway over. I mean, that's just too difficult.
You were being a responsible employee. Well, yes. I was like, it'll be fine. I'll figure it out.
I'm curious, what was the hardest part of the drinking game? What got you?
So my friend made it up, and she was like, look, here's the thing. We're going to, every time that Allred looks exasperated, like, can you believe this guy? Can you believe, like that kind of thing?
Right.
That every time Cancun was brought up, and then every time Cruz said immigration.
Oh my gosh.
And so like halfway through, one of my friends tapped in and was like, yeah.
You're feeling that this morning, I know.
My friend was like, we gotta adjust. We're just gonna have to cut this down. So then we changed it to allredfacts.com.
Yeah. Oh, that too. It's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. That was difficult too. And then every time, Allred was just like, looked at him like he was a lunatic. And I'm like, yeah, man, but he knows what he's doing. So don't let your guard down. It was great.
I know. Both of them were laughing at each other the whole night.
Yeah, it was pretty great. I agree with you. It was a pretty I'm like, oh, you both came to really get into it today. And I'm appreciative of that. I am appreciative of that.
As did you. That was an ambitious drinking game. Respect.
Oh, I'm an idiot. Listen, I'm feeling it today.
I bet so.
So is there anything else you like to add that we haven't talked about, related to this race? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think the only reason people should listen to this is to make a decision and get out and vote. Remember, early voting starts in less than a week now on Monday, October 21st. I suggest everybody vote early. Election day is less than 3 weeks away now. And it's just so much easier to walk up with no line. I vote early every time.
Same.
Just get it over with. But make sure you vote, because if you don't, then all this conversation is for nothing.
Yeah, please, y'all vote. Listen, this has been a treat, Ryan. Thank you so much for being here and talking to me about this. This was awesome. I really appreciate your context and perspective. This is dope.
Thank you so much. I'm a big fan of this podcast, so it's so cool to talk to you. Y'all are doing really good work. So I hope people can take something away from this, learn a little bit about the election, and then put that into practice and make your vote.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find links to Ryan's social media in our show notes. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.